You're tuned to the Nowhere Signal. What you're about to hear was never meant to be found.
Caleb Wren had never been much for sleep. Even before all of this. Even before the voices. He worked the overnight shift at a university cleaning crew. Empty halls, flickering fluorescents, the steady buzz of vending machines. He didn't mind the silence. It suited him. No one asked questions. No one looked twice. After his shift, he'd go home, eat a bowl of dry cereal, and twist the tuning knob on his ancient shortwave radio, the kind that still clicked when it turned. The kind with a cracked plastic dial and numbers that never quite lined up. Most nights, it was just static. Other times, foreign news reports or faint gospel songs from the next state over. But on Tuesday, March 18th, at exactly 2:47 a.m., something different came through. It started like a mechanical cough. Sharp, spitting static. Then silence. Then a tone. Not quite a beep. Not quite a chime. It hit some frequency that made the air shiver around it. Caleb blinked. Leaned closer. The hairs on his arms stood up. Then a voice. No. Voices. Layered on top of each other, shifting in and out of rhythm like a chant recorded on warped tape. The language wasn't English. Wasn't Spanish. Wasn't anything he recognized. And yet, he listened. Entranced. The message lasted 28 seconds. Then it cut out. Back to static. Caleb stared at the radio. Hands still on the dial. He hadn't touched it. The next night, at 2:47 a.m. on the dot, it came again. Same signal. Same voices. But this time, a different sequence. Longer. Sharper. He started recording them. Old cassette tapes. He'd rewind and play them back over and over, trying to find a pattern. He noticed something strange. The voice always began before he turned the dial. Even if he powered the radio off and on, the signal was waiting for him. By the end of the week, Caleb had heard it 5 times. And something inside him shifted. He began humming the tone without realizing it. The same soft, bending note that preceded each transmission. He caught himself sketching symbols in the margins of his work logs. Not letters. Not even shapes, really. They looked more like cracks in glass. But when he looked again, the cracks had meaning. He began sleeping less. But he felt more awake than he ever had. Then, one night, he dreamed of a door. A massive black door, sunken into the ground like a buried vault. And a voice, whispering not to open it. Not yet. He woke up gasping. And the symbols from his dream were already scribbled in ink across his arms. He didn't remember doing it. That night, 2:47 a.m. came again. The voice returned. But this time, Caleb heard something new, a single recognizable word. His name. Spoken in reverse. The next morning, Caleb stood at his bathroom mirror. His reflection looked worn, hollow. Dark rings carved their way beneath his eyes, and faint lines, ones he didn't remember having, traced his forehead like spider webs. But that wasn't what caught his attention. What caught his attention were the symbols. Etched in sharp, black ink across his forearms. Looping, fractured curves. Angular dashes like broken runes. They looked almost tribal. But the shapes didn't belong to any known language. They were familiar in the way a face from a dream is familiar. Unreachable. Almost real. He ran hot water over his arms and tried to scrub them away. They didn't fade. Later, he checked every pen in his apartment, none of them had been used. And none had ink that dark. His hands had bled faintly during the night. There were tiny dots, as if small pinpricks had formed the outlines of each mark. Had he carved them? The thought chilled him, but he didn't feel pain. At work, he moved through the motions of his janitorial route like a ghost. Empty hallways blurred together. Students passed, eyes locked to their phones. No one saw him. But something followed. Every time he passed a dark window, he could feel the static hum. Like the signal was hiding inside the glass, watching. The vents hissed louder than usual. Light bulbs flickered, just barely. Once, an emergency exit sign flashed briefly with a strange glyph, the same symbol now tattooed on his wrist. At 2:47 a.m. that night, Caleb didn't wait. He sat in front of the radio early, eyes locked to the dial, fingers shaking. The signal came like clockwork. Sharp. Immediate. But this time, he didn't just listen, he understood. Not in the way a translator understands another language. It was more like his brain already knew what the sounds meant. The message unfolded in his mind like muscle memory. It said, "Take the photo. Bury it beneath the one-eyed tree. Leave before dawn." There was no question of which photo. He walked to the closet, opened a box he hadn't touched in years, and pulled out an old Polaroid. His brother. Smiling. The one who disappeared 15 years ago without a trace. He hadn't thought of him in a long time. Not clearly. But now, it felt like this was connected. Like the signal wanted him to remember. At 3:19 a.m., flashlight in hand, Caleb stepped into the cold dirt lot behind his apartment building. He moved past dumpsters and rusted fencing. There, at the edge of the lot, stood a twisted pine with a knot that looked uncannily like a single closed eye. He didn't hesitate. He knelt. Dug through gravel and frozen soil with his bare hands. Placed the photo inside. Covered it back up. When he stood, he looked back at the tree. Its branches now pointed in a new direction, toward the alley. There had never been an alley behind that building before. He didn't go down it. Not yet. He turned. Walked home. That night, he dreamt of a room. Small. Dark. Windowless. Only a single red light blinked in the ceiling. And on the floor, a circle. Drawn in symbols that flickered as if made of static. He stood in the center. And across the room, something was standing in the shadows. Watching. Waiting. He woke up not afraid. Not confused. But with one clear word in his mind, next. Caleb woke before the alarm. Not that he needed it anymore. Sleep came in short fragments now. Shallow. Weightless. And always wrapped in those same images, circles, shadows, blinking red lights. But this time, something was different. On his nightstand sat a small paper he didn't remember placing there. It was torn from a notebook, rough around the edges. Drawn on it in black ink were the same looping symbols from his arms. But now, they were arranged in a line. A sequence. Caleb didn't understand the individual shapes. But he knew what they meant. He felt it in his chest. Like remembering a song you never learned. Each symbol pulsed with a strange certainty. Instructions. The first, a key. Old, brass, tarnished. It belonged to his father's storage locker across town. He hadn't touched it in a decade. Hadn't wanted to. But the moment he saw the symbol, he knew that's where he had to go. The storage unit complex sat beneath an overpass. Cold concrete and humming sodium lights. Most units were abandoned. The manager's office was dark. His key still worked. The door creaked open. Inside, a dusty filing cabinet. A typewriter. And a box labeled Caleb, do not open. He didn't remember putting it there. He opened it. Inside were photos. Dozens. Most of them of him, taken from a distance, sleeping in bed. At work. Walking down streets he didn't recognize. He flipped to the back of one. In black marker, a date, March 18th, the night he heard the first broadcast. Another photo showed the alley behind his building. But the photo wasn't just of the alley. In the far background stood a tall shape, half obscured by fog. Humanoid. Unmoving. Watching. The next symbol on the paper pulsed in his memory. A triangle inside a circle. It meant, return the envelope to where you found it. Do not look behind you. He didn't remember any envelope. Until he checked his jacket pocket and there it was. Unmarked. Sealed. Thin and heavy. He returned to the alley. It was darker than usual. Like the shadows had thickened since his last visit. He walked to the fence post near the tree. Left the envelope there. He turned to go and then stopped. He almost looked over his shoulder. Almost. Instead, he focused straight ahead. Walked. Slow. Steady. The alley seemed longer than before. His breath clouded even though it wasn't cold. He didn't run. Didn't blink. Just walked. Back home, the radio was already on. He hadn't turned it. 2:47 a.m. The voice returned. Only now, there was no static. Just words spoken in that same alien rhythm, but with a clarity that pierced bone. Caleb didn't need to translate. He knew. The voice said, "You are the relay. You are the witness. Prepare for transmission." Then the lights in his apartment all flickered. Not off. Not out. They changed color. Everything turned blue. Like submerged in deep water. He looked into the mirror. And for a split second, he saw someone else staring back. It had been 4 nights. 4 nights of static, symbols, and surreal instructions. Caleb hadn't told anyone. There was no one to tell. His co-workers barely remembered his name. The cashier at the corner store didn't make eye contact anymore. And lately, when he passed people on the street, they looked through him. Not at him, through. That morning, he noticed something new. His calendar had changed. Every day on the page was now marked Tuesday. The same date. Over and over. He checked his phone. Same thing. Even online clocks refused to move past the 12th. Time had become stuck. He knew where he had to go next. Not because the voice told him directly, but because he dreamed of a red tower. Its silhouette jagged against the sky. A place humming with old electricity and silent language. He didn't know how far it was. Didn't check a map. He just walked. He left his apartment at noon. Sunlight was unusually dim. Clouds hung like damp paper over the sky, gray and unmoving. He followed a long, sloped road that curved out of town. Past gas stations he didn't remember being there. Past intersections where traffic lights blinked yellow forever. Eventually, trees closed in. Pines thick with old bark and low-hanging mist. At the bottom of the hill, he saw it. The tower. Red, rusted. Half-fallen scaffolding. An old broadcast antenna crooked like a cracked spine. It sat behind a chain-link fence, padlocked and overgrown with vines. But the gate was open. Swinging. Slowly. As if waiting for him. Inside the structure, he expected silence. Instead, he heard whispers. Dozens of them. Too faint to understand. They bled out from behind the walls, from under the floorboards. And above it all, a constant low hum. The same frequency from the 2:47 broadcast. He climbed 3 flights of metal stairs, each one groaning underfoot. At the top was a broadcast booth. Dust covered everything: rotary dials, broken knobs, piles of yellowed papers. But in the center of the room sat a single functioning radio transmitter. Lights blinking in rhythmic pulses. Power on. There was no power line feeding it. No battery. It just worked. He stepped forward and touched the mic. It was warm. That's when the screen in front of him lit up. No prompt. No logo. Just 3 words in white: wait. Then speak. He sat in the cracked chair. Waited. At 2:47 a.m. on the dot, the room filled with static. Not noise, presence. And from the speakers, not a voice, but 100 layered voices, overlapping in impossible patterns. His head pounded. The lights blinked once, then turned red. And suddenly, he felt it. The message wasn't coming to him anymore. It was coming through him. His mouth moved. Not by choice. By compulsion. He spoke in the strange language. He understood it now. And as he spoke, somewhere, someone else was listening. Down the hill, in a small apartment building he'd never seen before, a young woman sat awake. Insomniac. Spinning a dial on her thrifted radio. At 2:47 a.m., the static cleared. She heard the voice. A voice she didn't know, but somehow recognized. She didn't know Caleb. But now, she would follow. Caleb woke with the transmitter still humming. His voice felt hoarse, though he didn't remember speaking. Not really. In his pocket, he found a folded note. It hadn't been there the day before. The paper was old. Fragile. Written in the same looping characters. This time, there were no symbols, just one sentence. Begin watching the glass. Back in his apartment, the mirrors no longer showed his reflection. Not always. Sometimes, if he moved too quickly, he saw his face lag behind. Or blink at the wrong time. Once, he caught a glimpse of his back while facing forward. He covered the mirrors. But even the darkened television screen reflected wrong. It wasn't his apartment anymore. Not quite. At the edge of the city, near a shuttered warehouse district, he saw them. Other people. Wandering the alleys. Their arms marked in ink and ash. Some barefoot. All silent. They did not look up when he passed. But at 2:47 a.m., they stopped. All at once. Like a switch had flipped. And with perfect synchronicity, each one raised their hand to the sky. Then they vanished into the dark. The next night, Caleb received his clearest message yet. The voice said, "The map is in the mirror. The passage opens backward. You are almost aligned." He returned to the tower. Inside the broadcast room, the glass window no longer showed the outside world. It showed a forest. One he didn't recognize. But it moved. And he realized it wasn't a reflection. It was a portal. No, not a portal. A window. To a version of the world adjacent to his own. The transmitter buzzed again. He reached out and touched the glass. It rippled. Not like water. Like memory. He saw flickers of alternate versions of himself. In one, he was wearing a technician's uniform. In another, a priest's collar. In another, he was strapped to a chair, screaming words that bent the walls around him. Each version had a different path, but each ended the same way, alone. Speaking into a microphone. Eyes wide. Voice broken. Back in his world, the static grew louder. It was no longer content to speak only at 2:47. It bled into 3 o'clock. Then 3:15. By dawn, it was a constant hiss in his ears, even when the radio was off. He wrote on the walls. On the floor. On the ceiling. The language flowed from him. He couldn't stop. It wasn't madness. It was transmission. And then came the phrase he would never forget. It rang out clear. Audible not just through the radio, but through every screen in his apartment. His TV. His microwave clock. Even his cracked phone. All flashing the same text: "Next, you must speak to the listener." Caleb didn't know who the listener was. But he felt it. Somewhere out there, someone was hearing the broadcast just as he had. waking up in the middle of the night, scribbling down phrases they didn't understand, wandering the streets without knowing why. The signal had passed to them. He was no longer alone. But that didn't bring peace. It brought purpose. And with it, a weight. On the 10th night, the voice returned. But it no longer came through the radio. It came from inside the walls. It whispered as he moved. It waited behind closed doors. It watched. The instructions became more cryptic. Turn north at the rusted pole. Whisper the 5th word at the mirror's edge. Burn the last drawing. He obeyed. Each action frayed his reality a little more. The sky flickered. His shadow sometimes split in two. One afternoon, he blinked and the sun reversed. Then, at 2:47 a.m. on the 12th night, the apartment fell silent. No static. Just a long, steady tone. The same pitch as the heartbeat in his ears. And then, the voice spoke one final sentence, send it forward. He understood. Caleb walked to the center of the room, where his old radio sat. Dusty. Bent antenna. Still crackling faintly, like it didn't want to be used. He turned the dial. Not randomly this time, but precisely. Until the frequency read 147.00, a dead channel. Until it wasn't. His mouth opened. No hesitation now. He didn't read a script. Didn't repeat what he heard. He became the signal. And in a low, layered voice that echoed far beyond the apartment walls, he spoke, to the one who hears this, welcome. You've taken the first step. This is not a story. This is not a dream. You were chosen to follow the pattern. Begin at the mirror. And listen. Miles away, in a city that hadn't existed the day before, a teenage girl stirred in her sleep. She sat up, drawn by a sound from the hallway. A small, forgotten radio sat on the floor, dusty and untouched for years. At 2:47 a.m., it came to life. She did not understand the words. But she felt them. She began to write. Caleb smiled. His apartment lights dimmed. And somewhere beyond the walls of time, the next story began.
The nowhere signal will return tomorrow. Until then, sleep light.